There was a pharmacy in my neighborhood, and there was a sign on the window that said delivery driver wanted. It was the easiest job I'd ever gotten in my life. Well, boy, was I wrong. And she's like frantically waving at me. And all of a sudden, I went bam. And he didn't even really acknowledge me after the crash. It was really strange. Are they mutes or something? I just didn't understand. It just made no sense. But of course, in time, it started to all make sense. And suddenly, the judge holds up a single piece of paper, and he doesn't say anything for about 5 seconds. And the room just goes silent. $10 million. And she yells something like, "Oh my God, what are we gonna do?" But the real holy crap moment didn't happen until I got back to my job at the pharmacy the next day. Growing up in Brooklyn, you see some really messed up shit. These stories have haunted me for over 50 years. Now it's time to tell them. My one rule, I don't name names. These are the Brooklyn Files, the real stories. In the 1980s, New York City was like the Wild West of litigation. In fact, historians and legal experts to this very day still refer to the liability crisis that's associated with that era. By the 1980s, million-dollar awards accounted for over 80% of total awards in court cases. The airwaves at the time were flooded with TV and radio ads telling New Yorkers, if you've been in an accident, you're entitled to cash. Those ads were everywhere, and this created a massive influx of first-time plaintiffs who saw every fender bender, every slip and fall as a financial opportunity, a way to get rich. So everyone just began dragging each other to court in hopes of getting a big payday. And sometimes it worked. It got so out of hand that it was always on the tip of people's tongues. Like back then, it was very common for somebody to throw around that threat very loosely, like they would think nothing of threatening, "I'm gonna sue you." In fact, in 1989, I myself was the victim of the so-called liability crisis. It was around April, I was 19 years old, and I was in need of a job. I could only remember a couple of times in my life when I was hired right on the spot, but this was one of those times. There was a pharmacy in my neighborhood, and there was a sign on the window that said delivery driver wanted, and it seemed like the perfect job for me. I loved driving my car as it was, and I needed the money, and a pharmacy seemed like a good, clean, relaxed place to work. And so I walked inside, asked for the manager. Well, there was this guy behind the counter, and he said, "I'm the owner," and he was this really happy-go-lucky kind of guy and seemed very friendly from the start. And he introduced himself, his name was Joel, and he said, "What can I do for you?" And I told him that I saw the sign out front looking for a delivery driver. And I think the next words out of his mouth were, "Well, when can you start?" or something like that. Like he didn't even ask me any questions. I think he just liked me from the start and just hired me right there on the spot. And that was all he asked me. It was the easiest job I'd ever gotten in my life. And I told him that I could start tomorrow. And I think he said something like, "Good, I'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. And that was it. So the job was really fun. I liked it. There were other people that worked there, and they took a liking to me, and I liked them, and I fit right in. And there were no problems at all. And I would deliver the pharmaceuticals, and the boss would tell me how well I was doing. He always encouraged me. He was just one of those guys. He almost sounded like Jimmy Durante, and he would say something like, "Jay, you're doing a fine job. I'm glad I hired you." And sometimes he would have me pick up his lunch, and I remember he always wanted me to get him cucumber and onion salad. It was just the thing with him, from the deli a couple of doors down. And then he would say something like, "My wife's gonna kill me if she knew that I was eating this again." And I'm not sure why that was such a problem. Maybe it was the onions, and maybe he went home and gassed up the house or something after that, but he didn't elaborate. I just sort of put that together. Well, one day I was finishing up a couple of deliveries, and I was returning back to the pharmacy. In fact, I was on the very next block of the pharmacy, and I could actually see it from where I was driving. I was that close. And I'm going down the avenue, and the light is green, and all of a sudden I see a pretty girl on the sidewalk, and she's like frantically waving at me, and I'm like, is she looking at me? And she was. So maybe she was like 22 years old, but she was very hot. She was wearing tight jeans and a crop top and looked really good. And again, she's waving at me to the point where I turned around, like you couldn't miss her. And I looked at her to see if I knew her, and all of a sudden, I went, bam. Next thing I know, there's this car in the middle of the avenue, and I had just smashed right into the back of it. And by then, I'm really confused about who that girl was. And of course, now I've got this big problem to deal with in front of me. And so I get out of the car, and the first thing I asked the driver was, like, are you okay? He was probably 45, 50 or so, average looking guy, but he didn't answer me. And he didn't even really acknowledge me after the crash. It was really strange. Then I realized that there was a younger man in the car as well, in the passenger seat, and the guy was maybe 28 or so. And I looked into the car and I asked him the same thing. I said, are you okay? And he too didn't answer me. And I thought it was like the weirdest thing. I was like, do these people not talk? Are they mutes or something? I just didn't understand. Like, why are these guys not talking? At the time, it just made no sense. But of course, in time, it started to all make sense. I then walked around to the back of their car and I looked at the bumper where I tapped the guy, and there was really no damage. Like, I mean, it was just this chrome bumper and there was just this little dent in it, like maybe the size of a quarter. I had a chrome bumper as well on my car. I had my 75 Monte Carlo, and there was nothing wrong with it either. Like, I mean, these cars were made like tanks back in the day, but by and large, there was really no damage on either of our cars. Not anything that would send it to the repair shop, at least. Well, suddenly there's a group of people and they're all gathering to see what happened. The driver of the car didn't attempt to call the police or anything, no ambulance. There was a payphone right there on the corner, but he didn't do anything like that. And he just pulled out his wallet, showed me his information, and then he asked me for mine. And that was all he said. It's like he said as few words as he could possibly say. And we just exchanged information, and then I figured it was more than likely over and that my insurance would just cover it or something. Well, boy, was I wrong. A couple of weeks later, my mother's pulling the mail in from outside, and she starts opening the envelopes. She tears into one of them, and I hear this scream come from her, and she yells something like, "Oh my God, what are we gonna do?" My mom's going through the mail, opening up envelopes, and I suddenly hear this scream, and she says something like, "Oh my God, what are we gonna do?" And I go running into the room. She's holding an envelope from the insurance company, and she's reading this piece of paper. Our insurance company was basically serving us notice that we were being sued by the guy that I rear-ended for $10 million. You heard right, $10 million. Now, I don't need to tell you that there was no way on earth we were ever gonna get that kind of money. I mean, my mom would go through the weekly grocery circulars just so she could find a whole chicken for 79 cents a pound, and you think you're gonna get $10 million from us? Are you nuts? And don't forget, this was an accident that wasn't even a big enough deal for him to call the police or an ambulance. And the damage on his car was the size of a quarter. This was so unbelievably hard to fathom. Like, what in the world is going on here? How could this possibly be happening? So my mom gets the insurance company on the phone, and I guess she speaks to one of the people there. And once she did that, we began to get a clearer picture of what exactly was going on. The biggest question my mom had was, how the hell do these people think they're getting $10 million from ordinary poor people like us? What we ended up finding out is that this isn't about getting $10 million from us per se, at least not entirely. We learned that this is a common practice that lawyers pull to find out exactly how much insurance you have. If they sue for a specific lower amount, then they might be leaving money on the table. But by suing for an astronomical amount like $10 million, it pretty much ensures them that they're gonna grab every cent available in your insurance policy. They know you don't have $10 million, but they're hoping that your insurance has a high limit, like let's say 100 or 300K, that they can bully the insurance company into paying them to avoid a trial. So this is nothing new to the insurance company. They're used to it. But that doesn't get me off the hook completely. There's still the possibility that if a judge grants a judgment against me, that $10 million doesn't disappear. In many states, a legal judgment can mean they garnish your future wages, like maybe for the rest of your life, so they can take a percentage of your paycheck for the next 75 years if they wanted to. Then they can attach a lien to your property, so even if you buy a house 10, 15 years later, that $10 million lien could be attached to it. So that debt could potentially follow you for the absolute rest of your life like a ghost that doesn't go away. So this was possibly the most stressful thing that I could ever have heard. But the next thing we find out is, guess who has to go to court to tell his side of the story? Yeah, you guessed it, I did. So it's a couple of weeks before the case, we get a visit from the insurance company lawyer, and he's on our side, obviously. And so he sits me down to essentially get my statement, but also to practice what we're gonna say in court, the do's and don'ts and things like that. So we go through the whole thing. I'm explaining that the damage was the size of a quarter and that no one went to the hospital and the police weren't called. And he tells me, he says, make sure you say all that in court to the judge, that's important. And obviously that was very essential information and worked in our favor. So a couple of weeks go by and I'm all anxious about the court case and how I have to speak to the judge and all the money that's on the line and all the what ifs. And I remember thinking a few times leading up to the court date, like, what if this guy pulls the same routine that the guy pulled in the Brady Bunch? Anybody who watched the Brady Bunch TV show back in the 70s has to remember the episode where Carol Brady accidentally backs into a guy's car in the parking lot of the grocery store. And in this famous scene in the TV show, the guy that she hit, he shows up in court and he's wearing a neck brace. And he's obviously there to turn this fender bender into some kind of a payday. And he's like faking the injury and he's like, oh, and he's making all these sounds and stuff, obviously trying to act as though he sustained some major injury or something. It was all nonsense. Well, I kept thinking about that episode and wondered if something outrageous like that would happen when we got to court. Well, the day we end up going to court, we take the bus downtown and we head to the place where the case is happening. We head up to the court, we open the door, we walk in, and I kid you not, I almost didn't even believe my eyes. But the dude was sitting there on the couch with a gigantic neck brace around his neck. You can't make this up. He was faking that he had some kind of a major injury from this little tap, and I swear on anything, this dude was pulling the same thing that the guy in the TV show did. It was actually kind of comical, but it was also maddening knowing that this guy was obviously faking it, just like the guy from the Brady Bunch episode was faking his injuries. It was just sad. He never even looked at us. He looked like he was acting, almost as if he was trying to look feeble and injured. It was sickening. It was literally laughable. We also noticed that his son wasn't there, the one that was with the dad in the car the day of the accident. So a little time goes by, we all file into this room. It's not your standard courthouse. It's like a conference room with a big table, and there's maybe a total of about 8 or 9 people sitting around it. It's me, my mom, our lawyer from the insurance company. There's a judge, stenographer, another court clerk, and I think a court officer, something like that. And then there's the plaintiff and his lawyer. So it wasn't this big spectacle that I expected it to be. I actually felt pretty comfortable and confident in this room, especially since I had pretty much rehearsed with our lawyer what I was gonna say. So the first one to speak was the plaintiff and his lawyer, and for like 20 minutes, the plaintiff's attorney starts painting this picture of this reckless teenager, me, slamming into a defenseless family, and he made it sound like I slammed into them going like 180 miles an hour. Then he started presenting these medical reports and saying the older guy had all these slip discs and all these injuries and how he needed surgery, and they claimed that the son wasn't in court because he was practically crippled and how his life was changed forever after this. And it was hard to listen to because we knew it was just a total bunch of bullcrap. Once they finished their performance, it was my turn to respond. And because I went second, my description of the minimal damage acted as kind of like a mic drop that dismantled everything they just spent 20 minutes building up. So I told the judge how there's no way they could have sustained these kind of injuries from such a low speed tap on the bumper. I mean, I even said to the judge, it's not like they got tossed out of the car and ended up on the roadway. How could they have gotten this injured? I even pointed out how they never even called for help, so how bad could it have been, I said. It actually started to look like the judge was seeing things from my side a bit from his facial expressions, as if I made some really good points. So then I finally wrapped up my side of the story. Then suddenly, the judge looks at me dead in the eye and asks, "Son, do you realize that if I find you liable, your life as you know it is effectively over?" And I could feel my face and my neck getting hot. You know that feeling like when you just want to throw up from the stress? And I'm thinking, why would he say that unless maybe I was gonna lose or something? Like, did this judge already decide in his head that he was gonna rule for the plaintiff even though he was lying, obviously? So right then, the plaintiff's lawyer slides this thick folder across the table, claiming that inside they have this irrefutable proof of spinal damage from this major crash that he painted it as. And the judge then pauses and calls for a recess to review the supposedly damning doctor files. And I felt like my life was about to end, to be honest with you. So we're all filing back into this large conference room after this recess, and the judge returns after reviewing all the medical documents provided by the plaintiff's doctor. We're all just settling in, and suddenly the judge holds up a single piece of paper, and he doesn't say anything for about 5 seconds. And the room just goes silent, and everybody's just looking at the judge, and you could hear a pin drop. And my entire life is on the line over this little tap on the bumper, and just waiting for him to talk felt like 10 minutes. And the judge just begins speaking. And he says that the piece of paper that he's holding is a memo from the Kings County District Attorney's Office. Then the judge begins speaking directly to the plaintiff's lawyer, and he's looking directly at him, and he goes on to say, he goes, "During the recess, we pulled some records and were able to find a bulletin from late last week." He says, "Your medical expert, Dr. Leventhal, had his license suspended 11 days ago, pending a fraud indictment." And then he says, "As for your clients, they filed this exact claim 4 times this year alone." The judge then looks at both the lawyer and the plaintiff with his fake-ass neck brace, and he says, "Not only are you not getting $10 million, but you'll be getting a referral to the Insurance Fraud Bureau." Both the lawyer and the creep with the neck brace were silent. They had nothing to say. They looked slightly embarrassed, but honestly, I don't even think these guys were capable of having any conscience and feeling embarrassed. But they began nervously gathering up their stuff, and they began talking among themselves as they quickly made their way to the doorway out of the conference room. And the guy just couldn't even look at me. He was so embarrassed. Just about as everyone was clearing out of this conference room, our lawyer for the insurance company leans into my mom and I, and he says in a somewhat low voice, he says, "There's almost no way we were gonna lose this case." He said, "I didn't want to say anything to you guys early on because I wanted to ensure that you would take this part seriously." But he went on to say, when the name of the doctor came up initially, when the court case was filed, he said there was this collective sigh throughout the insurance office because everyone there knew that this doctor was notorious, especially in this particular district court, for making false medical reports to support fraudulent insurance claims. In fact, the judge even knew this guy was a fraud. In other words, this doctor's known for fudging records so he can get his cut from fraudsters. He's a fraudster himself, and he plays along with it. The air just totally leaves the room. The case is dead. And I end up walking out of that conference room with my mom, feeling like I just dodged a $10 million bullet. But the real holy crap moment didn't happen until I got back to my job at the pharmacy the next day. So I'm standing there behind the counter waiting for my delivery orders to be filled, and Joel, the owner of the pharmacy, he pulls me aside Now don't forget, the accident happened right there on the very next block, just a few hundred feet from the pharmacy. And so word travels fast in that neighborhood like that. And he tells me that a couple of the other shop owners on that street had been talking, and it turns out that they'd seen this exact routine, the one that happened to me, 3 or 4 other times already that year. They told my boss that it was always the same exact setup. This really pretty girl in her 20s would stand on the sidewalk right as the light turned green, then she'd wave or do something to get the driver's attention, and the second the driver looked her way, the father and son in the car in front of them would floor it for a second, and then they would slam on the brakes. It was a total swooping squad, as they call that type of scam, using her as the bait. They probably did this as a father and son team because they know they'll get more money if there's supposedly 2 people injured in the car instead of 1. And they weren't just scammers, they were pros. I was just the latest mark they'd picked out because I was young and distracted. The best part? While they were trying to sue me for $10 million, the neighbors had already pegged them as frauds. My only regret was that we didn't find out this information leading up to the court date. I guess in Brooklyn, if you're gonna run an organized scam, you probably shouldn't do it on the same block 4 times in a row where everybody's watching.